Geeks and geekettes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, gats and kittens, mein Damen and Herren, Democrats and Republicans, welcome to Ask Chuck Dixon, where you get to ask me questions about what I do for a living, and what I do for a living is write comic books. Let's not waste one more memento of your valuable time. John Bua, I love The Watchmen. Thought Killing Joke was okay. Loved Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow. But to me, Alan Moore, I mean, we're assuming he's talking about Alan Moore. To me, Alan Moore's best works were Cinema Purgatorio, which I have never heard of, From Hell, Swamp Thing, and Tom Strong. Are you a fan of any of these? And what about the British writers in general? I've gone into the British writers enough. I'm going to leave them alone today, except for Alan Moore. I'm going to talk about Alan Moore. My favorite Alan Moore story is the story he did in one of the Superman annuals, artwork by Dave Gibbons. Most ridiculous premise you can possibly imagine. Batman, Robin, and Wonder Woman show up at the Fortress of Solitude to wish Superman happy birthday, and things go sideways because there's a bad guy out to get all of them, and basically he creates this, the bad guy attacks them with these hallucinations in which they, vivid hallucinations in which they, in like a dreamlike state that seems very real to the characters, they're taken to a sort of parallel world where, you know, if they had made different choices, what their life would have been, and all the rest of it. And it's like all three of the characters go on sort of an acid trip. And but it's a great story. It's just absolutely perfect in every way. And Alan Moore shows his love for these characters. Unlike a lot of British comic writers, Alan Moore actually likes and respects and reveres these characters like the rest of us. They're figures from our childhood that we enjoyed. And it's just a great story. It's seamless. It's perfect. And of course, the Gibbons artwork is absolutely marvelous. Moving on, my second favorite is his Swamp Thing run. He takes Swamp Thing and he doesn't really reboot it. He sort of revisits Swamp Thing's origin and explains. He gives a different explanation of how Alec, whatever his name was, becomes the Swamp Thing. And all these ramifications to it and everything else. And he has a ball writing this series because he does stuff with Batman and all the rest. And I was lucky enough to spend quite a bit of time in this period with the art team, Steve Bissette and John Tottleman. We went to a number of conventions together. I visited John's house in Erie, Pennsylvania, and got to, get into these guys' heads about what they liked and what they brought to this, their relationship with Moore. They liked their relationship with Moore, not so much the relationship with DC Comics, who kind of looked on Moore as the sole reason why the Swamp Thing series was successful, and didn't give a lot of love to Bissette and Tottleman, which he should have. And of course, Alan Moore would have insisted on, because, boy, they brought it. I mean, they really got Moore's vision. And of course, at this time, they showed me Alan Moore's script. I'm like, oh my God, I couldn't write like this. These scripts were thick. For a 22-page comic book, it was nearly screenplay length, as he went into great detail and often off on tangents about things within the story. But yeah, these are the two things I really like about Alan Moore. I really enjoy Tom Strong. The only thing I find about Tom Strong is I don't remember much of it. I mean, I read all of them, but there's nothing really I remember about this series. And the reason for that is probably because I was introduced to this character as an adult. If I had been introduced to this character as a child or a young adult, I probably would have remembered more. It probably would have been more impactful to me for whatever reason. I don't want to say I've outgrown superheroes, I've outgrown this kind of story, but these kind of stories are less impactful on me now that I'm an adult. And that's not condescending or anything else. It's just the nature of the beast. But I enjoyed it, and the craft, and Chris Sprouse artwork, and my friend Hilary Barta got to work on a lot of stuff there. There was a lot of energy happening around that. What was it? The World's Finest Comics imprint, and once again, more showing his love for these kind of stories rather than being cynical about them, as so many of the other British writers are. So I guess I did make a little comment on the British writers, didn't I? Joshua Ignatowski, he's back, and I've cut off part of his thingy here. Okay, are there any teasers you can give us about the upcoming Zeylin comic? And that's how you pronounce it, Zeylin, from Rippaverse. It's super exciting to see the Rippaverse go to space, and the comic sales demographics could be really boosted if you gave us a taste of what we can look forward to here on ACD as well. If you can't, though, maybe NDA Andrew can in the comments. Well, get ready for it. Wait for it. Here's your preview. Okay, that's enough. Yes, Zeylin is my cosmic character. He came about because Joe Bennett and I just, brothers from another mother or something. I mean, we just really get along well. I mean, from the very first instant, I get him, he gets me, and we trade a lot of ideas back and forth. And I had visited the Rippaverse, the secret Rippaverse headquarters somewhere outside Dallas, earlier in the year. And I came away after talking to Eric and talking to the number of the people there, that what Rippaverse really needed was a space-going character. They needed their own Space Ghost, their own Green Lantern, their own Nexus, or their own Silver Surfer kind of guy, a cosmic character. And I talked to Joe about it, and Joe sent me all of these pages that he had done for a cosmic project that never got completed, never got published, and blew my mind. I was like, okay, yeah, man, I didn't know it. I wanted to work with Joe on this, but I didn't know how damn good he was at this genre. And I think it's going to blow your mind. The Saska sisters say that Zeylin is trippy. And I think it's the first trippy thing I've ever written. But it's cool, it's unique, and it is very Rippa. Joshua, again, in Robin, number 25. Tim Drake says that one of Batman's first rules is to never fight angry. Despite this, however, Bruce broke this rule once during Nightfall due to being under the influence of Scarecrow's fear gas at the time. Do you know of any other times Bruce may have broken this rule in post-crisis continuity during or before your time at DC? Hey, 10% more Ignatowski. What are you going to do? No, I've never seen that. I mean, Nightfall, Batman was not at his best because his capabilities have been reduced by, all the things that Bane was doing to basically ruin every day of Batman's life. And then the influence of Scarecrow. Of course, you can excuse poor Batman. He was under the influence and went crazy. I've seen Batman angry, but not fighting angry. I've seen him, look kind of ticked. A story I reference often in the lead feature in a detective comic back during Archie Goodwin's run. I think it was called Night of the Stalker. And Batman's been just about had it with these armed robbers and gets a little ticked. But fighting someone who's his equal or whatever. No, Batman keeps his cool. He's the coolest guy ever. So there you go. Joshua again. What do you think is Dr. Seuss's best work and why? I read my kids a lot of Dr. Seuss because it's fun to read. I think that's one of the appeals of Dr. Seuss for parents to buy more Dr. Seuss is because they are fun to read. Some books are really tiresome and tedious. And if you have kids, you know what I mean. They don't want you to read the book once. If they like the book, they want you to read it every night. So some books are just, God, I have to read this again. But Dr. Seuss, I didn't mind, because it's silly and you can do the voices and all the rest. Dr. Seuss and another series of book called The Stupids. were my favorite to read to the kids. If you have kids um, of reading at bedtime age, look for books called The Stupids. My favorite being The Stupids Die. So anyway, my favorite Seuss's, and this is from when I was a kid to when I was an adult, reading them for my kids. My favorite of all is Thidwick, the Big-Hearted Moose. Dr. Seuss didn't really deal so much until later on in life with political themes. Thidwick, the Big-Hearted Moose is from, I believe, the 40s or early 50s. And it doesn't deal with political as much as human nature. And I like it because it's kind of a lesson about self-reliance and knowing when you're being used. And this is a theme that Seuss returns to quite often. If you don't know the story, Thidwick is a big-hearted moose. Hey, big surprise. And a bunch of animals, a bunch of loafers and parasites and freeloaders take up residence on his horns, his antlers. And Thidwick puts up with it. Why? Because he's big-hearted. And he puts up with it until the whole thing reaches a crisis point. And it's a funny story. And you also take a lesson away from it. Same thing with Horton Hatches the Egg. Once again, it's another character who's put upon by a pretty much useless character. And this story is funny and in the end heartwarming. A little bit of a dark edge to it about because I don't know if you read the story. I don't want to spoil it for you, but Horton hatches the egg, and the little bird inside bonds with Horton. And then as soon as all the hard work of sitting on that egg for months after months after months is done, the mom shows back up from Florida. She's been vacationing and says, "Oh, I'll take my child now." It's like, wow, that's a great allegorical story for all of us. You didn't do any of the work, but you want the end result. Another one, Yertle the Turtle. And Yertle the Turtle is about oppression and elitism and class and all the rest of it. And basically not going along with the hive mind, not going along to get along. I imagine this was Seuss's reaction to the rise of fascism and Nazism and communism and all the rest of it. And this was his gentle little allegory for the kiddies about, hey, you're your own person. You are an individual. You cannot be told what to do by others if you do not wish to be told so. And think for yourself. That's what Yertle the Turtle told the kids, and these are valuable lessons. So those are my three favorite Dr. Seuss's. Joshua asked, how many typos would you typically make during a day of writing? And as you can see, I made a typo here. I included the text of your last message, your last question here. How many typos do I make? I've lost count of how many typos. Ask Michael Hutchison, who proofreads my novels, my prose novels, looking for typos. He'll tell you it's a typo-rich environment. And largely, this is because I never learned to type. I don't make actual typos because I don't type. I just pick the wrong keys. Yeah, I'm a moron. I most of the time have to be looking at the keyboard. It's hunt and peck. My two index fingers flying around the keyboard. And my understanding is that Stephen King writes the same way. Stephen King never learned to type. And, from what I can see, it never hurt him. So, and at this point, people go, well, why don't you learn to type now? At my age, no, it would be a disaster. And why bother? I mean, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Maybe my writing would change if I learned to type. Maybe I would type idiotic stuff. Certainly make more typos for a very long time until I got the hang of it. Right now, I'm pretty quick. But yeah, I make a lot of typos, and I got to go back. And the funny thing is, when if you've ever written, you know this already. You can go back and reread your work. You can even be deeply involved in rewriting something and miss typos, just not see them at all. And then on the other hand, some I can just spot immediately. I can look at a whole page of type and go, wait a minute, something's wrong here. Oh, it's that word. It's wrong. And I think we all make common typos. I can never type the word just, that it doesn't come out juts. And for the longest time, I had a hard time typing Conan's name, which was a problem when you're writing Conan. Every time Conan was mentioned in the story, it would be a typo. His name spelled without an O. Why? Who knows? Ask your mom. Joshua's back. What inspired you to make the town of Desolation into a lawsuit capital of America in Green Arrow 110? It seems like that place just can't catch a break. Yes, in a Green Arrow, Green Lantern crossover event, crossover stories, I suggested that Green Arrow and Green Lantern return to the town of Desolation. And Desolation was first appeared in Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams' run of Green Arrow, Green Lantern, their celebrated or controversial run, depending on how you look at it. And Desolation was, this town with all kinds of bigotry and pollution and all, just, bad stuff happening. Stuff that just make a liberal just cry all day. Just horrible. There's lots of social commentary in the story and the rest of it. And when I was writing this arc, along with Ron Mars, and it was my idea that they visit Desolation. At the time there was a town, and I can't remember where it was, and there had been some sort of chemical spill or something. I can't remember now what it was, and the whole town won this huge class action lawsuit against the company that polluted the river or polluted the ground. I wish I could remember the details, but I can't. And all of them became wealthy overnight. And I thought, wow, wouldn't it be cool if that same thing happened to Desolation? And so now Desolation doesn't look anything like it looked before. There's all kinds of new mini mansions, and everybody's driving Cadillacs and big four-wheel drive pickups. And they're all living the life of Riley because they won this class action lawsuit. And part of it was my own little wry commentary on Denny and Neil Adams' original story. And I really had a great time talking to Denny about it. And he laughed. He laughed because he knew where I was coming from. He knew who I was. And he dug it. I don't think he dug it, but he got a laugh out of it. And particularly because, this had actually happened in real life, that a town became wealthy overnight through a class action lawsuit against a major corporation. Okay. Hey, Bridget wants to know, have you subscribed to Ask Chuck Dixon? You don't want to disappoint her. She'll leave. So if you've subscribed already, thank you, but check and make sure you're still subscribed. If you haven't, hit that subscription button. It helps reach more folks. Walt Kevin, you answered a question about Airboy in a recent Ask Chuck Dixon, which got me thinking of a bunch of Airboy questions to pass along. Have you ever crossed paths or worked with any of the classic Airboy artists like Dan Barry, Fred Kita, Ernie Schroeder, or Carmen Infantino? What about any of the old writers? I don't really know who wrote the old Golden Age Airboys. I have no idea who wrote those things. No, I never met any of those guys. Although Dean Mullaney, publisher of Eclipse, when we were doing Airboy, he got Fred Kita to do a piece of artwork for us, really nice piece of artwork of Airboy. And he reached out to Frank Robbins. We wanted Frank Robbins to do at least a cover, and Frank Robbins was retired in Mexico and just said, I don't do any work like that anymore. No. And Dean offered him some crazy money to do a cover for us, and he just said no. Dan Barry I never met. Weirdly, as many times as I went up to DC Comics back in the 70s, I never ran into Carmen Infantino. I would run into Dick Giordano and Joe Orlando and other people, but I never met Carmen Infantino. It's kind of, I don't know how that even happened, because the nature of the way DC Comics is set up, you would just walk up and down the halls running into people. But I never met him, was never introduced to him. Whoop, twin spin. Congratulations, Walt. How did your Airboy Deadeye series come about? Is that what sparked your occasional collaborations with Antarctic Press? Yeah, Deadeye was it was kind of a weird thing how it came out. Gianluca Peretta, who is a Italian comic book artist, he approached me just out of the blue. I didn't know the guy. He just sort of approached me over the internet, said, "You want to write an Airboy project together? And I can line up the artist and I can do all the hard work and everything else." I'm okay. So we worked together on a plot and everything else. I did the final script, and he had some sort of connection with Antarctic, and I went with it. But my connections with Ben Dunn and his brother go way back to when I was on Airboy. When I was at Eclipse, I did a project called Swords of Texas, which was a spin-off from Tim Truman's Scout series. I did a Swords of Texas with Ben Dunn, and then I would see him often at conventions. We would always seem to be at the same conventions all the time, and hit it off. I like Ben. I like Ben a lot. I like working with him. I like he's a good businessman, but a guy you can trust. And so we've actually worked together on other stuff. I wrote a graphic novel for him a couple of years ago, which I don't know if he went anywhere with it. He did some initial sketches and stuff because Netflix was asking him if he had any more material. Because I don't know if you know this or not, but Warrior Nun on Netflix it's an based on an Antarctic comic, and he came to me to write this graphic novel, sort of 60s spy spoof thing. But I don't know if it went any further than that. I certainly enjoyed writing it, and Ben paid me for it. But it's frustrating. It's frustrating sometimes when you write a project and it never becomes a comic. I'm dedicating myself now to making some of these unrealized projects come to light. More on that in the future. Triple spin, man. Walt, you're got a man on third. Any good research stories from your time working on Airboy? Yeah, I wanted to update the aircraft that Airboy, Valkyrie, and Skywolf would use. I gave Valkyrie an A-10 Warthog. I had a book about A-10 Warthogs with all kinds of pictures of the cockpit. It was a walk around, what they call a walk around book. All these details, all these pictures, and I got to Xerox them for Stan Wack, who was drawing the book at the time. And I remember Kat gave me a hard time because she said the Warthog is ugly. And I said, well, Valkyrie is a former Nazi. And this is the plane she'd picked to fly. Because, yeah, it is ugly, but it's lethal. The Warthog, if you know anything about the A-10, it's lethal as hell. Now, this is not an A-10, obviously. I'm talking about an airplane that basically, it's an airplane built around a Gatling gun in its nose. And it is a nasty weapon. And that's the one, that's the only plane Valkyrie would want to fly. A flying gun. But I also wanted Skywolf to fly an Apache attack helicopter. But at the time, there wasn't a lot of stuff available about the Apache. There wasn't yet a book of pictures or photographs or all the rest of it. There wasn't a model kit. There was really nowhere to see an Apache. I had seen one briefly in a magazine somewhere. So I contacted Boeing and explained what I wanted, and they were very gracious. And they sent me stacks of black and white photographs and color photographs and brochures and everything else. So they were terrific. But the one I ran into trouble on was I saw a picture in the background of a photograph, a military photograph of this vehicle I'd never seen before. It looked like a Jeep that had been injected with hormones. And I didn't know the name of it. I didn't know anything about it. And I wanted to use it in Airboy. And I wanted to use it with the Punisher eventually. But Airboy, I really wanted it in Airboy. And I called the Army. And I said, hey, I saw this, and I described the vehicle and everything else. And they said, oh, well, that's a Humvee. Okay, that's a Humvee. Now I know what it is. And I said, can I get pictures of it? I need pictures for a comic book. And they were like, oh, no, that's all classified. I said, classified? I saw a picture of one in the newspaper. And no, that vehicle's, we can't send you pictures of that to a civilian, blah, 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 blah. So I got nowhere. I thought, where am I going to get pictures of this thing? That's when I thought, hey, you know who I should have called first? The Marines. Because I bet if the Army has these, the Marines have them too. So I got a hold of somebody down at Quantico, and I explained my problem, and they were like, "Well, we don't know." And I said, "Well, the Army told me no," and they were like, "Oh, okay." And within a week, I had this honking big package of photographs of Humvees, Humvees of all types and modifications and everything else, because the Marines, they always come through. You know what? Walt, quadruple spin. Okay, it's a 3-run homer. Bases loaded. You were doing some interesting things with the Flying Dutchman when you wrote Airboy for Eclipse. He was such a tragic, mysterious character. Did you have any long-term plans for him? What about for Skywolf and Valkyrie? The Dutchman, no, I didn't. He's a character originally drawn by, I think, Dennis Fujitaki for Hillman, and I like the look of him and everything else. I used him. I didn't really have any long-term plans. The Golden Age characters, if you've never read Airboy, appeared largely in the Skywolf backup feature, which took place. The Skywolf backup feature begins at the end of World War II and goes all the way up to through the 50s, and following Skywolf's career and as a mercenary pilot. And yeah, I used the Flying Dutchman, the Flying Fool. I can't remember all the other characters. Boy, I had a lot of fun writing those high adventure kind of things. But no, I didn't have any plans for him. Valkyrie, no, I did a couple of miniseries, but I didn't have any long-term plans. I mean, she was going to be associated with Airboy, but outside of that, I didn't really. She appeared in 2 miniseries and an Air Maiden special. The Air Maidens, they were the other ones that would often appear, Black Angel and such. Hillman had, populated Airboy, which was a 52-page comic book, populated it with, exclusively aviation-based heroes for all the backup features. So there was this rich cast of characters to use, and I used them because they were all cool. They all had a great visual, and they had been drawn by great artists. We mentioned Carmen Infantino, Flying Fool. I don't want that call. Flying Fool was that was the beginning of the Man from U.N.C.L.E. theme. That's my ringtone. For those of you who are saying, "Hey, what's that ringtone?" Anyway, Carmen Infantino had drawn Skywolf, backups and Airboy lead features, and some great guys. Jack Kirby drew Flying Fool for quite a while. So, just deal with my cell phone here. Yeah, these are live. I just didn't know it's not live, but it's live recorded, and I don't have the wherewithal or patience to edit. Now, as far as Skywolf goes, I did have plans to take him all the way up into the early 60s. And he was always getting involved in revolutions and civil wars and, that kind of mercenary adventure, tough guy stuff. And I began a series that never got published that was going to begin in Airboy 51. And where Skywolf gets hired by Castro to be a pilot. When Castro was in Mexico prior to the Cuban Revolution. And in this story, Skywolf met not only Castro and Raul Castro, he met Che Guevara. And in the Skywolf series, I mentioned a few times that Skywolf was the guy who killed Che Guevara. And eventually, I was going to do this Cuban revolutionary story and then a couple of other stories, and then eventually get to that story where Skywolf guns down Che Guevara. But I never got there, unfortunately. So you can find this in one of the Airboy omnibuses or compendiums that Eclipse did recently. They published this unpublished Skywolf story because I still had Xeroxes of the pages. Okay, Michael Partika. I'm curious to know, this one gets a little deep, folks. I'm curious to know about your relationship as a writer with editorial departments you've worked with at various companies. When you turned in a script, I assumed it got some editorial review before it went to the penciler, in case the editor wanted changes made. If the editor wanted changes, would the editor suggest that you make the changes? Or would the editor make the changes himself, herself, or could it work either way, depending on how much needed revision? Was it contractually specified how much you might be required to change? I'd especially like to know how this went at Marvel, DC, and today Rippaverse. I'd love to know whether Rippaverse asked for any changes for you on Alpha Core #1 before you sent the script to Joe Bennett, assuming that's how it works with you and Joe. Or do you and Joe collaborate tightly and deliver more of a finished script and pencils product to Rippaverse, which they might then ask for changes on? Looking forward to Zaylan, by the way. Horseman is ordered already. Well, thank you so much for that. This is a great question. Most editors want you to make all the changes. If they'll reasonable editors, if there's changes that need to be made because either a mistake was made or a continuity error, or perhaps the editor thinks maybe there was a missed opportunity in the story, or there's something that wasn't clear in the story, they'll want the author to make those changes. Even minor changes, which I wouldn't mind the editor. I would never know the editor made. Good editors will contact you and say, hey, how about fixing that? Or would you want to fix it? Or let's talk about it. That's a good editor. And there's a difference. There's two kinds of editors. Archie Goodwin was a great editor. He would gently suggest, nudge you toward the way he wanted things done, but very rarely, because he was a hands-off editor. Most of the really terrific editors I worked with were that way. Archie and Denny O'Neil, John Barber on G.I. Joe, Larry Hama, pretty much left you alone, unless you really screwed something up or really made a big error. They left you alone to do what you do. They didn't make any changes to the work or even suggest changes to the work. Sometimes, as I've often talked about here, some editors would even let a story go that they really didn't like, but they understood maybe the readers would. Most memorable for me is the Captain Fear Batman story that my editors hated, but still allowed to go to publication, but would not let us ever use Captain Fear again. So, as our punishment. And then there's the other kind of editor who just wants to be, in your face all the time. He wants to be over your shoulder as you write. He wants to write it himself, obviously, but he doesn't have the time or the talent. And he wants to tell you how to write the story. And these are the most overbearing. They're micromanaging. They're asking for lots of rewrites. By the way, you do not get paid for rewrites in comics, so it is an imposition to ask a writer for rewrites. Artists often will be paid to redraw things because it is more laborious, and so artists will be paid for redraws. Writers don't get paid for rewrites in comics. I guess unless you're like Neil Gaiman or somebody, they probably pay him for rewrites. Although I don't know any editor that would ask him to do a rewrite that would have the cojones. Largely, in recent years, your editors don't know a damn thing about comics anyway, but they think they do, and you run into that more and more these days. Now, generally, I don't have an editor really now. I mean, I hand you mentioned Rippaverse. Well, let's get to Rippaverse in a minute. One example, perfect example of this, is when I was on Moon Knight, Mark Spector at Moon Knight. I was hired by Carl Potts, and Carl and I already had a good working relationship from me writing Alien Legion, which Carl created. And Carl gave me his basic take, what he expected from the book, and everything else. That Mark Spector would abandon his 3 schizophrenic identities and only be Mark Spector. And we would lean hard into his mercenary past, which is why I guess he wanted me on the book, because I would dig writing something like that. And everything went along great, and we got along great, and I think we did some really cool work. And then, for whatever reason, Carl was assigned to something else, and I got a new editor, And the new editor was the other kind of editor, the one that doesn't leave you alone, makes suggestions, asks for rewrites, asks for clarifications, and changes your work without asking you. I remember on a issue of the Moon Knight where Moon Knight teams with Spider-Man and Punisher, the editor rewrote most of Punisher's dialogue because he thought the Punisher was too sardonic or brutal in his dialogue, and he changed it to soften it. If you've read the issues, you'll see that by trying to soften it, he really made it worse. But anyway, but what can you do? It's work for hire. I have no say over it. I didn't create these characters. But that's a perfect example of night and day change on a book. And that editor, he worked hard to make me so miserable I would quit. And I realized what he was doing, and I told him, look, man up and fire me or not, but I'm not going to quit. You're not going to make me quit this book because I like it. I like working with Sal Velluto, and I like the characters, and I'm not going nowhere. But he eventually fired me. Now, as far as Rippaverse goes, yeah, I don't really have an editor. The books get edited. I mean, Eric looks at them. Caro Brown looks at them. The aforementioned Andy Andrew looks at them. But I've never been asked to really make any kind of corrections. I look forward to the fact that, the Saskas and Mike Baron and I and Eric are the ones building this universe. And we kind of correct each other. If we go off in a tangent, we go off in the wrong place. We correct one another, and we're sharing all of our work and everything else to create a consistent universe. And that's really job number one here, is to create this consistent universe. And I see further down the road as everything gets more complex and the ensemble of characters grows. Eric's probably going to have to hire a continuity cop. And I actually discussed this with him last time I visited Rippaverse HQ. That eventually this is going to get out of hand, and you're going to have to find some super fan who can oversee all of this. Much like Mark Grunwald kind of served that purpose at Marvel, and Peter Sanderson was he was the DC librarian when I was at DC, but he was actually their continuity cop. He would know everything about every book. He knew every character, and he would be able to tell you by issue number, where, okay, what you did here was wrong because in this previous issue, Captain Potato Salad, loved his mom, as opposed to what you've written here. So yeah, I mean, I don't really have editors. I'm working on crowdfunding projects. I guess Graham Nolan is an editor. Richard Meyer is an editor. Vox Day is an editor. They serve that purpose, but it's not the same relationship because we're all also creators. So it's more like a big party. Party at Graham's house. There you go. Hey, errata. That means mistake. For those of you not fluent in Latin, like I am, not fluent in Latin. I made an error last time, and it was about Moon Knight. Pork Hunt catches me. He calls me out. He says, you said Moon Knight number 34 with Frenchie facing off against Killer Shrike was not your idea, but you're credited as writer of the issue with J.J. Birch as the artist. I don't remember that at all, but it's true. I looked it up on Grand Comic Book Database. I wrote this issue, and which explains a lot, because why would the new writer on Moon Knight want to go back and refer to one of my unfinished plot lines? But I guess that makes sense. I don't know what happened. I don't remember anything about this. I mean, I remember working with J.J. Birch a few times on Punisher. I liked him a lot. I probably still like him today. But I don't remember. I don't remember anything about this. I don't know why the editor who had fired me would call me back to do this. The only thing I can think of is that this might have been a leftover script. I may have written my next script before I got fired and handed it in and got paid for it. And then they made the change. So I'm betting that's what happened here. So I'm sorry. I was mistaken. I did write this issue. All right. What's next here? Rex Moss. If an election does not go your way, do you think this would destroy your ability to write forever? No. And I think he's making reference to at least one comic creator who said he will not write comics ever again because he is so devastated that the presidential election did not go his way. No, I've been doing this for close to 40 years. There's been a few elections didn't go my way. It never affected my work output. I was back to work the next day. Maybe a little bit of an election night hangover, but I was still back to work. It just doesn't affect me that much on a emotional, visceral level. And it shouldn't affect you either. I mean, if you are unhappy with the election results of the recent presidential election, remember, you woke up in the United States of America, and you're going to live the rest of your life, hopefully here, unless you promise to leave. And you're an American with all the rights of an American. And no matter what hysteria has been foisted upon you, it's not going to change. They're not going to take your rights away. You're still going to be a freedom-loving American, no matter who wins. This is, we live in a tremendous country. And yeah, you might be impacted. We were all impacted. We've all been impacted by things like inflation and shortages and things like that. But life goes on. Hurricanes and tornadoes and earthquakes happen no matter who's in the White House. You just sort of have to live through it. These are the times we live in. But in the end, we have a flexible, vibrant, robust system of electing officials, and it will continue. And you shouldn't be harmed. The only direct impact I can think of that a presidential election could have on you, and has had on me in the past, is if you're making enough money. I remember there was an election during what I call my Elvis year. It was the year where I made the most money I had ever made writing comics. I had a lot of hit books. I had a couple of books that sold in the millions. And I made a lot of money that year. And then the presidential election brought in a new administration, and they changed the tax rules. So I sent a tear-stained check to the IRS that April for a lot more money than I thought I was going to have to give them. So that's really the only direct effect. But in the end, but did I cry and scream and run out and burn the barn down, or vow not to write again? I mean, that's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. It's not like a revolution happened, and they're going to move a guillotine into the into the town square. The election didn't change that much. It didn't change that much of your daily life. It changed nothing for me. I live in Florida. So this is an old Arab proverb I might have made up, but this is what I live by. The dogs may bark, but the caravan moves on. You live your life. Live your life whatever way you want to live it. Make whatever adjustments you need to make according to whatever level of political impact some guy in Washington, D.C. might have on you. But, don't get all wrought up over it. It just ain't worth it. It's not worth it. It costs you, right? And to me, if you're going to get that upset about it, and you look upon, the victor of the recent election as some sort of an enemy, well, then you're giving it away to that enemy. So just leave it alone. Just get on with your life, and pray the price of eggs goes down. Pray they do something. Mr. President, have pity on the working man. brunobookstore@gmail.com if you want to contact me. My offer still stands. If you donate money to St. Jude's Hospital, let me know in an email sent to brunobookstore@gmail.com. I will send you scripts. I will send you files of free, absolutely free, full scripts that I've written in the past. Some of them go back 20 years or more. And some people have actually made requests. A guy recently gave quite a bit of money to St. Jude's and said, "Can I have a Connor Hawke script?" I said, "Yes, you can, my man." And sent him off a Connor Hawke script. So brunobookstore@gmail.com. And that address is good for all your questions, suggestions, and everything else. Almost all the questions today showed up in this email, at this email address. So there you go. That's it. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching, liking, subscribing, all those other things. And I will see all of you, I hope,